I want to grow up and be someone who can write like this, who can write like I speak and be still respected by the publishing world. Um, and I remember I spoke to one of my teachers, Mr. Kim El at the Bronx Academy of Letters, because he had made us read Drown in ninth grade.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, but do people read him? Like, do people actually read him? And he was like, yeah. I'm like, are you sure? Because like I couldn't wrap my head around like there were actual like entire audiences reading his work because it sounded so much like us.
Mm-hmm.
And all the work that to that point was being put in front of me was like, formal and like the way you're supposed to write, the way you're supposed to speak. And so I'm so glad now that, kids and readers in general have so much more access to more books that truly do sound like us,
Mm-hmm.
um, because it's necessary. I think, writing and voices that speak to our communities is really, really important. And it's the only way that we also see ourselves in the world, like through music, through books, through like shows, like we want to see ourselves and like those voices definitely have to sound like us.
What's going on, guys? Welcome to Growing Up Latina. I am your host, Ali V. Welcome, Lorraine Avila, to the show. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm really excited to be here and to be the first author. I feel so honored.
Oh my
So
God.
thank you. Thank you for having me.
How long have you been an author?
I published my first book in 2019. So an author, I think just like 3-4 years.
Mm-hmm.
A writer for much longer, probably close to my whole life. Like I
Really?
always like to include, the stuff that happened when I was like learning to write, 4 or 5, falling in love with writing and all of that. I still count that, even though like some folks think it's like cliche or like tacky. I'm just like, no,
Really?
I'm gonna include that.
Yeah, I love to write. So one thing that I always do, every morning when I wake up, I actually write a letter to the universe.
Mm.
And it's something I actually graduated with a BA's in English and writing. And writing has been something that it's weird because I don't pray the typical way that you would pray. I actually write. So I write letters to the universe. I write letters to God. And I put them in like this folder. And I'm always telling myself one day I'll write a book or something.
I love that.
So yeah, it's something that's like in my spirit. So I want to know how, like when did you first fall in love with writing?
Yeah, first of all, shout out to your discipline though, because writing every morning, like I always wanted to do like the artist pages, which is like every morning waking up and just like going. And I just don't I lack the discipline to do that.
Really?
So shout out to you. Yeah, I'm going to try, the energetic
Yes.
year is ending. So I'm like, maybe like as we step into like Aries season, which is like the real new year.
Ooh, that's your season?
Yeah, that's my season. But it's actually the real new year, like the
Really?
energetic new year.
Is
Yeah.
that what they say, really?
Yeah, for sure.
Wow.
Pisces season is really like the end of the year. It's like the final sign. Things are wrapping up. That's why, like, for a lot of us, naturally, like January, February still feels like months where like it's really not. It feels like you're just getting going, but it's like you're still ending a year. You're still ending like a cycle.
Right.
And then once spring comes in, it's the new year. But
So I will show myself some grace that I've been slacking on my New Year's resolution
Yes.
from January to February. So
yeah,
Aries now, April. So now
Yeah.
we're here,
yeah.
and this is the start of your New Year. So
Yeah.
when was like the first time you fell in love with it?
Yeah, I want to say that I fell in love with writing through poetry. I'm not like, I do write poetry and I'm getting comfortable calling myself a poet. I'm about to finish my MFA at the University of Pittsburgh and I've taken more poetry classes than I've taken fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really just helped my writing in general. But I will say when I first started understanding like what writing truly does, it was in second grade. I was in Miss Laura's class at PSMS 95 in the Bronx. And my father had just passed away and we were in the poetry unit.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember being like, Miss Laura, I want to write a poem about my dad. And I did. And it was the first time that like I wrote something and it was like being dedicated to someone who was no longer here. But every time like I read that poem to my family, to my sister, my mom even made me take it to DR for his like Nueve Dia, and like I read it to my family, even though I wrote it in English and they couldn't understand. It was just like a little ritual. It felt like just that poem. That was the first time I like fell in love with writing for sure.
That's beautiful. Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
What do you identify with and why?
In terms of
So everyone has like a different answer,
yeah,
right?
Okay.
So feel free to like answer however you want.
But you mean like background and stuff?
Yeah.
Okay, so I identify as Dominican American. I also identify as a Black woman, as you know, for all intents and purposes, because we use the word Latina so openly. I think in the United States particularly, I'll say like Black Latina, but for the most part, I identify as like, you know, someone from the Bronx with roots in the Caribbean. I think especially Caribbean is what I most identify with, like Caribbean American, because the way I show up, I think is very Caribbean. Even when I'm speaking Spanish, my Spanish is very Caribbean. It's very Dominican. It's very our language. And that's also the way in which I write. So I think that's what I identify most with.
So, and you said that because we were just having a conversation offline, and you said that you just flew in here from Dominican Republic.
Yeah, I flew in yesterday.
So what were you doing over there? Were you just like visiting family? Like, what was that like for you?
Well, I grew up going to DR like every time I didn't have school. So I have like a very close relationship to DR. I think a lot of us as like Dominican Americans do. But as an adult, I've continued to like cultivate that relationship, because even though like a lot of my friends who I grew up with in DR are grown up and like we're not really close anymore because they have families and like things just happen, I still do have friends there. And yeah, I went to visit one of my best friends, Mechi, and she was translating the making of Yolanda la Bruja. And so it was like a process watching her do it, but also like I was going, because every year for like the last 3 to 4 years, I've been going from like either October or end of December and just spending the last chunk of like the energetic year in DR to just wrap some things up. Like it really does feel like a grounding I get in DR that I don't get necessarily when I'm in New York or anywhere else, to be honest. So that's what I was doing, kind of just dealing with some like things that are wrapping up in my life, tying loose ends, and, you know, just being closer to nature, being able to have the beach right there.
It makes all the difference.
Yeah, and also like just getting out of the U.S. context, to be honest. I think con el corre de Nueva York and of just the U.S. period, like we get so disconnected from ourselves. And
it's true.
Yeah, and I think like going back to DR really allows me to remember like everything around you, all the people around you, even like vecino, even like the people del colmado, like anyone is like a part of your day-to-day community. And so like I just feel like we lose that here sometimes. And it's just nice to be like, oh, I have community anywhere I go, but also helps me like really appreciate the community I also have in the US that sometimes I forget. Like, oh, I go to the bodega by my mom's house, like I don't talk to these people. They don't know my life, but these are part of my community members, you know? And I really just love going to DR and having those reminders from being there versus being in a city.
Yeah, I always say like New York is like a real thing in terms of like a New York minute, the hustle and bustle of New York. So a lot of the culture gets lost here. When you go to DR, or, you know, I actually went to DR for my birthday last year. There's something that's like so simple, like the simplicity of it all, where it's like you don't need much, but you're so happy and you're so grounded, and it's like a reset for me. And it sounds like for you, you had that reset.
Yeah, I did.
Do you get inspired to write over there? Like,
yeah, I do. I've also been spending like, I think it was like in 2021 and 2022, I went back, I think it was like 2 or 3 times in the year, and I spent like really long chunks of time there. And it's mainly to write. I just feel, or like revise or do research. I just feel like just being there does give me like the space that I need to really get into the stories I write. And all of them are always connected in some way, shape, or form to DR. Not necessarily like the physical space maybe, but definitely like the content and the culture and the characters I write are always very connected to DR and like the practices we have there.
I want to get into your writing a little bit.
Yeah.
So talk about the first book you've ever published.
Yeah.
And what was that like for you, the process of writing it, and also like what inspired it?
Yeah, so my first book that I published was Malcriada and Other Stories. And it was a process of writing for myself mainly. Like I really love stories and I really, really love short stories. And I was going through a process while I was writing those in which like I just felt like I couldn't go straight into more training for writing because at the time I just needed to get a job and make money.
Right.
And so I went into teaching, and as I was teaching, I took whatever time I could to write stories. And they were mainly stories for me, kind of like stories about characters who were going through like difficult processes, whether that was like losing a parent or going through a breakup or, you know, being triggered about like violations they had in the past or, you know, just basically women and kids having really difficult moments and being like, you know, being in New York
Right.
and being Dominican and having to grapple these identities, but also having to grapple like the lives that we lead here. I want to say that the whole collection felt like a bunch of characters going from the process of healing to, from rupture to healing.
Right.
And I really feel proud of Malcriada and Other Stories. I think just like the response I got from community for that book was just, to this day, like I still get emails of people being like, thank you so much. Like, or like folks still like taking pictures and posting it on Instagram and all of that. And even though in the traditional publishing world, I guess like Malcriada and the Stories was just kind of just like, it was just published by a small press, Dominican writers. So folks were like, in the traditional world, it didn't get a lot of attention. But like for a lot of like my direct community in New York, I know it was important. And beyond that too, like I know that there are like folks writing like their PhD theses like and dissertations on Malcriada and Other Stories. And I think like, yeah, I think it was just of stories that really were difficult to write because there was a lot of content in there that felt very personal. It also felt like spoke to a lot of our experiences. But yeah, it was my first book and it's always going to go down as like my first baby.
That's like your baby, I know. How long did it take you to write that book?
Yeah, I want to say it took me like 7 to 9 years just because, yeah, I spent that much time like writing short stories by myself. Porque I didn't write Malcriada and Other Stories like thinking it was going to be published. I was basically teaching like, 7 to 5 every day. And then on the weekends, whenever I could, I would work on a story and then spend time revising it. And then in 2017 or 2018, I believe, Angie from Dominican Writers hit me up and was just like, let's publish a book. And I was like, yes. I was submitting a novel I'm working on to her. And then I was like, actually, I don't want to do this novel right now, but I have all these stories that I've written over the years. Like, she was like, yeah, that could definitely be a collection. So it was a collection.
That's amazing. And when you got into your second book, which is here, right? This is your second one. There's two-part question. One, how do you select the covers? Is it you that selects the covers for the book, or are you having someone select the covers for you? Like, how's that process for you?
Well, for Malcriada and Other Stories, I definitely worked with an artist. Her name is Crystal Rodriguez. Her name on Instagram is Dominican Bruja Princess, and she's amazing. Like, she does a lot of like actual painting. Like, I don't know what she uses, but I think it's like oil and acrylic and stuff like that. And I always knew like she's gonna be the person who makes my first cover. So she did that, and that's still a beautiful cover. And then for this one, Celestial Summer, I worked with Nyanza D, who's also an artist. And we went through like 4 different covers and it just wasn't hitting. Like, and then I saw her do this for internal page. something similar. And I was like, actually, like, that's the cover I want. Like,
What was it that spoke to you about this cover?
Yeah, just the characters looking at each other like that. It's Celestial Summer is a story about like two folks who are dating and they do psychedelics together. And they just have this intense like moment of seeing one another with all their flaws, with all their triggers, with all their like and I don't know, there was something about the way they were looking at each other that I'm like, that is the cover that I want.
Oh my God. And how long did it take you to publish this book?
Yeah, so I wrote Celestial Summer in 2020. I've crowdfunded for it on Kickstarter.
Okay.
So folks donated like $16,000 for this to be published. And I self-published it finally last August. So it took me about 2 years. It would have definitely taken me longer had I not had the money, had I not had like people really supporting it. And yeah, I'm really proud of it.
Does your family support you in this writing journey?
Yes, they do now.
They do?
They do now.
Now, what was it like before? Like what?
Well, I always knew I wanted to be like an author, but when I first got out of college, and I was thinking about like, maybe I should find a way to like not work and write, my grandmother and my mom and everyone was just like, that doesn't make any money. Like, why are you going to write? Like, and I was like, okay, fine. So that's why I went into teaching. But now, especially after Malcriada and Other Stories came out and they saw like the reaction like the public had to it, and they also saw that I was making some level of money, I was able to quit teaching and just focus on writing. And also like I've continued my training, so I'm getting my like second master's now. So like to them now it's like, oh, okay, like they kind of understand it as like, oh, you're still studying and you're also writing stories that people really feel called to. So they support it in that way. I want to say that sometimes they don't understand it, right? Like that sometimes they're just like, well, if it's not making you money. Now that like after I got an agent and, you know, now that The Making of Yolanda La Bruja is my first traditionally published book.
I love this.
Yeah. After this one, I think they're just like, okay, now this is legit. This is official now.
Yeah.
Which I understand and respect. I think a lot of folks see publishing that way. So I want to say overall, though, now they do respect it and they do see it as like my life's work, which it is.
There's so much that I want to unpack here because I'm like, I want to get into this and then I want to get into the story. But what did they have in mind in terms of like what your career should be?
Yeah.
Like what were some of their visions for you?
Yeah, so it was because it's my fault, you know, like when I was little, I was just so curious. So at the beginning, when I was like in middle school, I wanted to be a lawyer. And, you know, my dad got me all these books on like lawyer stuff and like whatever. So I think for a while they were just like, oh, she's going to go into law. And then I changed my mind and I was like, I think I want to do something like more, like somewhere when I was in college, I got my BA in English and Middle East Studies, which I know Middle East is like not, Middle East Studies is not the correct term, but like that's what they gave me. And so like for a while, I was like, maybe I'll get a job at the UN and do like translation work. And then by the time I was like in my first year of college, I thought I was going to do med school. And then I bombed
and you're
all of the medical school classes.
Oh my God.
And I was just like, yeah, this is not for me.
This is not for
and
me.
Then my grandmother one day was like, pero ¿qué es lo que tú estás haciendo? Tú sabes que a ti lo que te gusta leer y escribir. And I was like, you're right. What am I doing? So I like did English and started focusing on that.
Shout out to your grandma.
Yeah. She was just like, girl, stop. and then I, you know, when I graduated, I had a cousin who was like a director at the school and she was like, yo, start subbing. And so that's how I got into it. I started subbing and then I became like a head teacher. And then I went through that process. I got my master's in education because I thought like, I really do love teaching. So they just wanted a more formal job for me where like I get a 401k, I get health insurance, I get all these things versus like, you know, right now I'm getting all of those things because I am at the University of Pittsburgh. But once that's done, like those are things I'm going to have to figure out for myself as an author now, right? Because like we don't get paid in those ways and we don't get those benefits unless like we're getting them for ourselves.
Right.
So I think they, like any other like immigrant family, just want you to have all the security you can in this country.
That's right. They
And
want that safety net
yeah,
just to make sure.
Yeah, they're just like, yo, if something happens, you have health insurance.
Right.
And I get it, because I think about that too.
But I think what's beautiful is that when you do write a book and you put it out in the world, it's something that's there forever.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like to me, like this is a part of your legacy,
Right.
right? It's something that one of my favorite books, I don't even think I've ever shared this, but one of my favorite books is by P.D. Thomas, Down These Mean Streets.
Yes.
Oh my God. And I'm telling you, that book, the cover is literally tearing apart. That's how long I've had it. And I don't care to like tape it up. Like I want it in its original form just because I love that book and what it represents and how connected I felt towards it in terms of like, you know, it's about a guy that grew up in Harlem and I grew up in Harlem. And so that's, you know, one of the things that I love about your writing is that it speaks true to the culture. And I think that's what oftentimes gives you that connection to any author, right? And I'm interested in hearing like who did you look up to in terms of writers and authors, and you know, who were some of your inspirations?
Yeah. So growing up, I definitely felt called by like Black American writers. I think like, you know, as a child, I read a lot of like Walter D. Myers. I read a lot of Sandra Cisneros. I read Dominican writers, of course, like Julia Alvarez, but I love Julia Alvarez. Like, so much respect. Her. And I also never felt called to the language she used because it wasn't a Bronx voice. It wasn't a New York voice. It wasn't like, you know what I'm saying? It wasn't like a Dominican York voice. And, you know, I always get nervous when I talk about this because, you know, I was also really called to like Angie Cruz's work, like Soledad and all of that. But I think the first author that I saw write in a way that moved me was Junot Diaz. And right now he's going through some stuff because of problematic things. And I'll put that to the side. But I want to be honest in saying that like the first person I saw write in the way that I spoke and the way the community around me was speaking was him. And so even though I don't support what he's done and what he's being called out for, that was one of the authors that I read that I was just like, damn, I want to grow up and be someone who can write like this, who can write like I speak and be still respected by the publishing world. And I remember I spoke to one of my teachers, Mr. Kim Elmaluali at the Bronx Academy of Letters, because he had made us read Drown in 9th grade. And I was just like, but do people read him? Like, do people actually read him? And he was like, yeah. And I'm like, are you sure? Because like, I couldn't wrap my head around like there were actual like entire audiences reading his work because it sounded so much like us. And all the work that to that point was being put in front of me was like, you know, formal and like the way you're supposed to write, the way you're supposed to speak. And so I'm so glad now that, you know, kids and readers in general have so much more access to more books that truly do sound like us, because it's necessary. I think, you know, writing and voices that speak to our communities is really, really important. And it's the only way that we also see ourselves in the world, you know, like through music, through books, through like shows, like we want to see ourselves, and like those voices definitely have to sound like us.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I think because for me, when I read a book, because it's so strange. My sister, I don't know if you remember, but like Goosebumps, do you remember that series? My sister Jessica loves Goosebumps. I mean, that was like her thing. And there was another book, I don't know if you remember this, called The Babysitter's Club.
Yeah.
Oh my God, Jessica would read that all the time. And I'm like, I can't read books that don't identify with me. Like I have to be able to identify to the characters. I have to fully immerse myself into that, you know, the place, the time and place. And now when I read, I'm either reading like books about entrepreneurship, books about the Latino culture, the community. Self-help books for me is like a big thing. I'm always trying to
Yeah.
rediscover. What are some of the books that you find yourself reading,
Yeah.
like on your spare time?
On my spare time, I still read a lot of short stories and fiction in general. I also read a lot of poetry. Um, the last book I read was her first Palestinian, by Saeed Tebi, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just a collection of short stories about like Palestinian Canadian character, just moving through that experience, and it really did like touch me. I think in general, like growing up too, I was just really called to reading books that were somehow reflective of everyday struggles. Like I remember I read Angela's Ashes by Frank McCourt, who's like a white Irish author. I was in ninth grade and it was literally his autobiography, but I remember feeling so connected to that character's experiences because I'm like, yo, he's just trying to make it out. Like he's just
Right.
trying to make it out the
Right.
gutter right now. And so like I think, I'm also always called to not stories about struggle because like that's not all we are and that's not all our lives are, but like
Right.
stories in which like characters going through those experiences can like find joy or find perseverance or find like a lot of relief in having like communities around them. Like that stuff really just alleviates some of the pressure I feel in my real life. I know they're like fiction stories, but like being like, look at that character. I thought she was gonna end up somewhere else, and here she
Yeah.
is still going. Um, gives me some like, it inspires me. So those are the stories I want to write too.
Do you feel like, and I always ask this question with whenever I have like a singer or some sort of artist on the show, I'm always like, do you feel like it's easier to create from a space of pain or from a space of happiness?
Yeah.
What do you feel like for you?
This is such a good question, and it's so layered because, I am someone who like I'm so tired of like the tortured artist trope.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm just like, we don't want to be tortured artists. Like, why
Right.
does all of our shit always have to come from that place of like pain and like struggling and going through it in some way? And like it gets so bad that like we romanticize struggle at some
Yeah.
point. But the truth of the matter is that that's what life is. Like we're always going through like highs and lows, highs and lows, highs and lows. And to be honest with you, I can write better and faster and quicker from a place of struggle. Like when I'm like going through a really hard time in my life where like things just aren't lining up or things are feeling like they're falling apart, like I
Mm.
can always turn to the page and it gives me some sort of like, it gives me some sort of alleviation. So I think even that isn't struggle, right? Because I go and write. Yes, I'm going through something, but also like the page gives me hope. It brings me back to a place of like, even though the story might not be good right now, it's going to be in 5 revisions down. So like,
I love
yeah.
that.
So
I
like I
love
write
that.
from a place of like, I turn to the page from a place of like, okay, shit is not good right now. But then it's like I revise best when I'm in a good place mentally. Like when
Mm.
I'm like feeling like all my needs are being met, when I have like all the resources I need in terms of like to pay my rent, to buy my food, to like be able to provide to people who need it around me. Like that is when I revise best, when my health is good, all of that. So yeah, I would say that's my answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I one of the things that I do also when I write is I oftentimes write in the future tense.
Hmm.
So I find myself always writing the things that I want. So my life could be horrible, but I won't ever put that on the pages.
Hmm.
I'm writing whatever I feel like best case scenarios are, whatever I feel like I want in the future. And then I find that it actually manifests for itself.
Hmm.
And I'm like, oh man.
Yeah, yeah. I learned to do that with my friend Melanie Santos.
Mm-hmm.
Um, she's helped me a lot with a lot of like journal prompts and just like reflective work in terms of that. To be honest, I still journal in a way in which I'm like writing what's actually happening and I'm
Yeah.
like this sucks.
Yeah,
I'm having
yeah.
a lot of tension
Well, that's
with this
because you
shit.
got to get it out, right?
Yeah,
Like, you
yeah,
have to just
yeah.
get those emotions out.
Yeah, but what I'm finding is, especially while I was in DR, I was actually getting really tired of journaling. So I wasn't even journaling at all. Because at one point I'm like, I don't want, I already have been through the hard thing. I don't want to keep writing about it.
Mm.
And so I did have like a good week though that I was writing in the way that you're saying right now, where I'm like, even if everything turns to shit, I'm gonna be good. Like,
Yeah.
just like doing some like more of like, let's look towards the future. And that really did help.
What does literary success mean to you?
Okay, hold on.
Is that like a tough question for you? Because you kind of gave me a reaction. So I'm like, wait,
I mean, I feel like it's not a hard question. I guess it's just like, some people like, some people are really comfortable talking about success. And I don't think I'm there in terms of like, I know what success is to me in my brain, but like saying it out loud to people always makes me feel like, oh, like just,
why?
I don't know. I guess I'm still making myself small in those ways, which I'm working on.
No, girl, you need to say it on the show.
Yeah.
Like, whatever the success means to you.
Yeah. So I think literary success to me would be, making enough of an income where like, or enough of an income where like, again, all my needs are met, where I can like pay my rent without a problem, where I can take a trip without a problem, where I can like have freedom to just write whenever I want and to whoever I want. So I think that's what literary success is to me, where like I am actually like making a life from my life's work, which is writing. And like I don't want to deviate from that ever again. I think I deviated once in my life right after college because, I just didn't have a choice. I had to get back to like working and making money and all of that. But I don't ever want to have that pressure again. Like I've given my life to writing at this point. Like I've, quit my job. I quit security. I quit a lot of things that like capitalism and capitalist folks tell us all the time. Like you're supposed to have this job. You're supposed to have a structure in your life where like, you know who your boss is. Like I don't necessarily want that ever again. I want like the life where like I can be like, yo, I'm going to El Campo for 6 months. I'll get 2 novels written some way, somehow. Or like I'll revise my book some way, somehow in 6 months living in El Campo. And then I'll return back. Like that is what literary success and also my life success would look like, where I just like, I can write my books. I can have my needs met. And I can like, know that there are people reading my work that are feeling affected by it or feeling changed by it. Especially with like the making of Yolanda la Bruja. Like I think success for that book would be like if girls in the Bronx literally saw themselves and were just like getting to, higher education or getting to their jobs after school or like, going into relationships with like whoever it is in their communities and feeling like I don't have to make myself small. I know what the worth of my voice is. Like that would be success for that book for me. Like it's always about that. Like how are people turning away from my book? How are they like being moved by it? I think like literary success also in our communities would be like my name being Angie Cruz, where like people say Angie Cruz, like at least in like a Dominican household where like folks have access to books and stories and things of that nature, and people like know who she is because like their stories have affected her, their stories have affected them, their stories have moved them. So I think that's what it is for me.
When was the time when, or was there like a pivotal moment in your life where you knew that you were going to go all in and you were going to bet on yourself and you decided, I'm not going to work anymore. That's it. I'm going all in into this writing.
Yeah. It was in 2018. I had been working for schools at that point for 7 years. And I had been through a number of schools. I had, given it my all. I was being a good employee, a good teacher. And then I started feeling really burnt out. That was one. And then I got into this car accident where like I had a high, like severe concussion. And I was actually messed up. And my job was just like forcing me out of FMLA, which was like, I was on medical leave. Like, that's how bad the concussion was. And they forced me out of it by guilt tripping me because they were like, there's no other teacher at the school who's better for these kids than you. Like, because I've always had students, specifically like students who, like, some teachers specifically, you know, the traditionally white teacher feels like it's difficult to reach. Like, for me, those students have never felt that way. And so I had really close relationships with my students, and also it was showing in the progress they were making academically. So they like guilt tripped me out of my FMLA, and it started to feel like once I went back, like I wasn't being like actually cared for. Like, y'all just wanted a body in the room. Y'all didn't care about me as a person, you know? And I was just like, you know what? Like, I was already making plans to quit teaching because I had gone to this book tour for Okweke Emezi, who had just written Freshwater, which is an amazing book. And I was listening to them speak about, you know, just finding an MFA that would fund you for like 3 years so that you had time to write. And I was like, I'm gonna actually follow that plan. And so I was already making moves towards that. But I think going through that process of like, I got a concussion, I'm doing a really good job, y'all are forcing me to come back, and when I'm still showing up as myself as a teacher, you actually don't care about my health. Like, you don't care about me. Like, si yo me muero mañana, you're just gonna hire someone else to come take my position.
Gonna replace you.
Yeah. And so I was also going through my Saturn return. Like, I think I was like 28 at the time, or 27. And I don't know, it just felt like life or death. I had hit up one of my friends, and I think writing mentors, even though she doesn't like that I call her that, Erica Buddington. And she was like, yo, are you going through your Saturn return? And I was like, yeah. And she was like, well, this decision you have to make about quitting this, like, you know, 9-to-5 situation, and like really actually focusing on what you want, which is like writing and storytelling. Like, that decision, if you make the wrong one, can potentially kill you. Like, so you have to actually become really serious about it. And I was like, I don't even got to think about this. Like, I really do feel like I'm going to bet on myself. And it really did pay out, because like right after that, like a few months later, I released Malcriada and Other Stories. And like, yeah, it was really...
And you never turned back.
Yeah, I never turned back. It did what it had to do. Yeah. So yeah.
What would be like some of the advice that you would give to like up and coming writers that want to get into this field? Were like you, in the sense of like, now they have a job, they're working for corporate America, they have one foot in, one foot out, they're not sure, they're a little hesitant. What would be like some of the advice that you would give to them?
I would tell them to do the thing. I would tell them to plan for it, though. I think I gave myself a year to like really work. I was working 3 jobs. I was like putting all the money away. I was making sacrifices to make sure I was giving myself a cushion. So I would say, like, do the thing, but like plan for it. Like, no lo haga lo loco, because it will bite you. Like, I think I should have planned more. Like, I had like that year, but I should have made it 2, you know? And if I could go back, maybe I would, but it is what it is now. But definitely plan for it and like do the thing. I would also say, especially for writers, I think I say this a lot in my writing workshops that I teach, that you have to invest into your practice. Like, you can't just throw yourself out there thinking like you write and that's enough, because it's not. Like, writing, being a good writer, making sure you are able to move through your words, like, you need practice and study for that. And so like, you know, taking all the workshops that you can, you know, there are so many writers on social media right now, like promoting their classes, promoting their work. There are also like some organizations who like give those classes in ways that maybe you don't have to go get an MFA or whatever, but you can take a few classes a year. There are so many brilliant writers out there doing that. Vanessa Martir, who runs Writing Our Lives, teaches really affordable classes every single week, I think, at this point, almost always. And it's like across genres. She teaches nonfiction and I believe fiction sometimes. Ariana Brown also teaches poetry workshops. I teach fiction workshop through like my brand Machete Writers. So I think honestly, like investing in the actual craft if you're serious about it, because you just need that for anything. Like, but especially as a writer, you just want to make sure that you're also like, you know, expanding the ways that like you see other people's work and you see your own work. So
what about the writers that are struggling to find their voice? Writers that have writer's block. And I know most writers do not like to discuss writer's block, but that's a real thing, right? So what about the writers that just don't know or have not found their voice yet?
Yeah, I think it's going to take a lot of practice. And, you know, again, for me, the way I found those things, my own voice was like, honestly, through a lot of like listening to music. I remember at the time I was listening to like a lot of No Name and J. Cole. Like I'm saying them in the same sentence and also thinking about what's going on with them. But at the like back then in like 2017, 2016, I was like listening to a lot of their earlier mixtapes and or like a lot of their earlier work. For any kind of like rapper or singer I do that, I listen to like their mixtape because I think that is where you find their voice.
That's like the B-side of it all.
Yeah, like that's where you know who they are. Like with Cardi B, like if you listen to like her early stuff that no one actually paid attention to, like that is where you know who Cardi B is. So like I would say like listen to music. Like that's how I found my own voice, where I was just like, damn, if I wrote a mixtape, if I was out here like rapping, like what would that mixtape be about? Like how would I want to like sing those songs or rap those songs? And literally Malcriada and Other Stories was that, like for me. I would also say like journaling and like figuring out what sentences you write that are just like, damn, like I did that. Cause I do that a lot. And that's what I use for a lot of like my captions on Instagram, where I'm like journaling and I'm like, damn, like
that's bars.
Wow, girl, you did that. You know? So those are like the places I found my work. But again, like I feel like I was really able to like hone in on like what I'm supposed to sound like when I was taking Vanessa's Martir's like Writing Our Lives classes, because she's really big on that, on like what do you write like what do you sound like, and that is what you want to focus on writing like. Because if you're trying to write like some white dude that makes $1 million a book deal, like that's not you. So your story is never gonna sound okay to anyone, because that's not who you are.
No, it's not authentic.
Yeah, exactly. So I would say like listening to music, figuring out other people's voices. And that's why like reading, a lot of people are just like, you have to be a good reader to be a good writer. And I believe that to some degree, but I also know that that's not always true to everyone. So like that's why I turn to music too a lot, where I'm like, if I'm not gonna read 20 people to figure out what voices, like let me go listen to music. So there are options, but I say like studying other people's voices will bring you always closer to yours.
As you start to leverage your voice, how do you use social media to amplify your voice?
Social media.
It's like the gift and the curse, right?
Yeah, it's been a process.
Really?
I didn't always like social media. Back in like 2015, like I would post like once every 3 months. I would go on like breaks for 2 years. Like I really didn't care that much. But then when I started to get serious about writing, I have a friend, Annie Bell, shout out to her, who like, you know, I was like, damn, Annie Bell, do you really think I could do this writing thing? And she was like, girl, you write a caption on Instagram and 300 people like it. And like, I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but I'm like, yo, you're right. Like 300 people like this picture because of my actual long ass caption. And so she was like, you should start a blog and just like start putting your little stories on there. And I was like, yeah, I am going to do that. So I started doing that. And so every time I was releasing a story, I would like focus on like putting a part of it on the caption and having like a really nice picture of myself and making sure those captions were always kind of telling a story that I wanted people to go and read on my website. And that's how I really started figuring out like how to use social media for that. I think now I think I just want my voice to be like one that brings a level of like reflection, like always like a lot of reflection to folks. I want to be authentic as possible everywhere in my life, but also especially on social media, because I think folks just think like people got to figure it out. Like just because you got like 1,000 likes on a picture, your whole life is figured out. And it's like, I want to be open about like, yeah, that's actually not happening. Like I posted amazing pictures yesterday, but like on the caption, I'm like, yeah, I'm not okay. Like I'm still like wrapping up a lot of things in my life that were actually really painful and like figuring out my life. And so just because you see a pretty picture, like that doesn't mean anything.
Like there's a real thing happening behind the scenes.
I think people forget like, social media is not real life. And I know we talk about that a lot, but I just want to be authentic and honest and as transparent as I can be while still protecting my private life, because that's my right to.
Right.
But that's the way I want to use social media, and I think that's the way I've been trying to use it.
Well, I was going to ask that, like, how much of yourself are you willing to share via social media? Because I feel like I struggle with that. I'm always like, oh, I don't know if I want to say that. I'm not sure. Like, because I always feel like social media, the minute you post it, it lives forever. Whether you delete it or not, it lives there. And so I wonder for you, like, how open and willing, and how do you know how much of yourself to share?
Yeah. I don't have the perfect answer for that. I have things that work for me, and I would say that I will share as much as I can in a way that still, again, protects my life and protects the people in my life. And I also, like, I don't share things around, like, like if I'm going through a heartbreak, like I'm not going to say I'm going through a heartbreak because that's not something I'm willing to share.
Right,
but
of course.
I will talk about like how hard things are feeling and like, what those things are poking at. And like, also like I'm open to sharing triggers. Like I am being triggered at this point in my life because of these like situations I've had, because I think especially that with all this healing talk that we have nowadays, I think people think they're supposed to be perfect. And I'm even talking about myself. Like I'm constantly triggered by things.
Right.
And sometimes I'm just like, have I not done the healing work? I've gone through the retreats. I've
Girl,
gone
the
to the
healing
therapy.
work
I've
is
gone
your
everywhere.
lifetime.
Yeah. And so like sometimes when I'm being triggered, I'm like, damn. So I kind of want to always be open about those things in order to like help people normalize. Like, yo, just because you're doing the healing work or you feel healed, like you are going to have reactions about things because you're a human being. And yeah, in the past, like I've been really open about, horrible stuff. I came out about a violation that happened in 2016, and all of 2020 was about that. Like, I had come out on social media about it, and there was just so much hate and negativity, but also a lot of support from my community at the same time. And I think that was the last time that I like particularly shared something so deeply emotional and intense and private. But I did that because there were so many other stories behind mine that needed to be said. And like those people were not in the point of their life where they were open to sharing that. And still aren't, right? But I felt like that situation was triggering me so much, and I wanted to like relieve myself of it, and also give people like the ability to be able to do that for themselves.
Right.
And so during that moment, I had a lot of like back and forth about like what should I share? Is this too much? Whatever. And it just got to a point where I'm just like, this is something that's worthy of sharing, because also one of my writing missions is just like to rupture the traditions of silences that we have as a culture.
I love that.
Yeah.
Can you repeat that? Because that was like a whole bar.
Yeah. To rupture the tradition of silences that we have as a culture is like my writing mission, my life mission. And so like when it comes to,
so good.
Yeah.
So good.
When it comes to like the ways in which men in our community continue to like create unsafe environments for us. I think we're always so hush hush about that, even though everyone knows that that man or that group of people, whatever, make environments unsafe for folks. We will sit here as a community, especially I'm talking about Dominican specifically, like we will sit here and somehow protect them with our silence in order to like not make a scene or not make a show or not have issues with anyone or mind your business. And sometimes like we are each other's businesses. And so like for me, I felt like I'm gonna come out about this because I've already heard enough stories to know that I'm not the only one that this has happened to. And even though like X amount of people are not gonna share their stories, I'm gonna share mine so enough people can hold that man accountable and enough people could stay away from him because he is not well.
Right.
And so that was the last time I shared something on social media that was really private, but I felt like this is a moment I'm going to take to share it.
And how did you feel after you finally like shared it and now it's released, it's out in the public? And
yeah, I go back and forth with it. I think at the beginning I went through like it was a lot. It was a lot. I hid for a long time after that. Like, I just didn't want to be seen. But then,
people are asking, what did she share?
Yeah.
Do you want to share it on the show? Like, what exactly did you share? Or
I mean, if you go on my Instagram, it's still there. Sometimes I'm like, I should take it down. And I'm like, actually, no, I'm going to keep it up because it is what it is. But, trigger warning, rape. I was like physically assaulted by someone in Dominican, New York City community. And and I hadn't even shared it with a lot of folks, but I started hearing stories about this particular person with other people. And I was like, oh snap. It wasn't a me thing.
Yeah, it wasn't just me.
Yeah. And so I was like, okay. And I just, I shared my story. I didn't name the person. I still haven't.
Right.
And it's just been a process. And so that was truly the last time that that happened. And I felt uncomfortable about it at the beginning. Again, I still feel uncomfortable about it sometimes because I'm like, I don't want people to think that's my entire story because I'm so much more than that situation. I think that's what I feared the most, where like, I was going to be the person that this thing happened to, and that's not the case, and I've proved that. So, like, it doesn't matter anymore. But I always, I always take the opportunity to talk about it if it makes sense, just because I do think social media, even though a lot of people are like cancel culture sucks, it's like, bro, are we actually canceling people? Because this man is still being paid. He still has a job. Y'all are still supporting his work. Y'all are still allowing him to eat. I'm not saying he should go in a hole and die, but like, I feel like cancel culture actually doesn't exist. Like, we don't cancel anybody. Like, like if those people are vivito y coleando, like, nothing actually happened except people are speaking about the truth, which everyone was speaking about behind closed doors. But now it's like, if you want to talk about it, talk about it.
Right. Like, let's have the conversation, but like for real.
Yeah, for real. And so like, that's just the type of person I am in just like my private life with my friends and family. And I try for it to be the way I am in my public life. But yeah, I mean, now I just feel very freed from it. Like, I feel like, it's not my business if anyone thinks that that's all I am in the world.
Right.
But I personally feel like really empowered by my own decision to share, because that's what I want to continue doing with all of my stories and all of my experiences. Like, if something horrible happens to me, like, y'all are going to know about it. Like, I'm not my grandmother. I know that we love being like, our ancestors are amazing. And there are a lot of great things I've gotten from my elders and my ancestors. A lot of things, especially the fortitude I have and the protection I have. But also there are things that our elders and our ancestors have done that have harmed us. And one of them has been like keeping all these things to ourselves, these horrible things that have happened to us. And for me specifically, like, if I'm gonna die, if I'm gonna suffer, I'm gonna scream about it. Like, y'all, I'm not a tree in a forest that's gonna fall and no one's gonna hear it. Like, y'all are going to know about it. So,
yeah.
and that is also a way in which I protect myself, because I think, you know, a lot of things that happen to kids and happens to like the most vulnerable of our populations is like people harm them thinking, oh, esa gente se va a quedar callado. Esa gente no va a decir nada. Like that person's not going to speak on it if something horrible happens to them. And so predators go towards those people. And I want to make sure at this point in my life, like if something happens to me, it's going to be known. Like I'm not staying quiet about physical, emotional, like any type of harm, because that's it. We've already gone through that, and that doesn't work for us, especially again for like the most vulnerable of our population, children, women, trans folks. Like staying shut is not the way. And I know that sometimes we speak on stuff and nothing happens, but I do hope that, and I have felt, at least for myself, where like things are shifting little by little because of people being really open about, you know, their experiences. You know, I do think like, yeah, I think at least in the communities I know that I move around, like, you know, predators in general, or people, men who like think they have more power than they do, just know to move more carefully and to actually like think about the harm they cause, and to actually consider like what is consent. Like, you know, like if someone tells you no at any point of the night, and, you know, you continue to have these things that you feel like pushing people, then you know what that is now, because there are actual stories out there that are telling you that.
And I think it's also important, like we hear the term accountability, right? But what does that really mean if we're not holding anyone accountable? I think it's important for people to know that that was a chapter in your life. And like you said, it doesn't mean that it's the full story. What is this chapter right now where you're at in your life? What is this chapter called?
I don't know. Damn, this is funny because I was talking to my editor yesterday, the editor of The Making of Yolanda La Bruja, and he was like, yo, you do so good with like chapter titles. And I was like, I do. And now I can't think about this chapter of my life.
Girl, I've been saying mine is Live and Let Live. This is my chapter.
Live and Let Live. Yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah.
I would say something like, I think I'm at the chapter of my life where I'm just like closing cycles. I think that, or moving from that place, like moving from closing chapter cycles, because I think I see ways in which like I've repeated a lot of things in my life, like, you know, whether that be professionally or in relationships or in,
like,
you know,
patterns.
Yeah, just patterns like showing up again and again.
Right.
And I see that so clearly now. And so I think that's the chapter I'm on right now, where I'm just like, okay, these are the ways I'm going to hold myself accountable. And it's by telling myself you're making the decisions that are always leading back to this place. And so like, how can you hold yourself accountable and like making sure you don't find yourself here if you can help it?
Yeah. So talk to me about this book. It's coming out. So the release is, do we have a date?
Yeah.
I know it's April, right?
Yeah. So The Making of Yolanda La Bruja is coming out April 11th. We'll be at the Lip Bar.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm so excited.
Oh,
it's
that's
like a
so
Bronx
good.
dream.
Yeah.
Yeah. So The Making of Yolanda La Bruja is released April 11th, and it's gonna be great. It's like a book about like faith, brujeria, and like a girl in the Bronx just trying to protect her community and protect herself and use her voice as loudly as she can to be like, yo, someone is harming our environment. Like, let's do something about it. And struggling with the fact that a lot of our voices aren't heard sometimes, but like making sure that she's like leaning on her ancestors and leaning on like the support of her bruja diosas to make sure that she keeps herself protected and that her community is as safe as it could be.
Make sure you guys pick up the book. You said the pre-order link is in your bio
it's in my
now. I do want to ask you a couple of rapid fire because we love these questions. Okay. What is the first book that made you cry?
The first book that made me cry.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, I can tell you the last book that made me cry.
Okay, that's
Okay,
good.
it was a good cry. Homegoing by Yagazi. I read it in Cuba and I finished it in Cuba, and I remember I was by the beach and I was just like sobbing, like by myself on a beach, like just crying. That's the last one I remember.
Okay, tell me you're Latina without telling me you're Latina.
Tell you I'm Latina without telling you I'm
Yes.
Latina. I eat rice like 3 times a week.
Oh, girl, I could eat rice in the morning if you let me. My mother would be so upset at me.
I know.
Finish this sentence. Growing up Latina is?
Growing up Latina is layered.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Shout out to you guys. Make sure you pick up her book. The link, the pre-order link is in her bio. What's your Instagram?
My Instagram is Lorraine Avila with _ at the end.
Yes. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm so
Our
honored.
first author.